the enormity of the situation that you might be in, and you're not going to be upset about what has gone wrong in the past. If you just focus on the hand at hand, you will play much better, and you're not going to get upset about what's happened, and you're not going to get nervous about what could happen. Very important to maintain your focus. Also, another great way to improve your game is to find a group of friends that share your enthusiasm for the game of poker and play a lot of poker together and talk about poker. One of the things that I think is most responsible for me becoming a good poker player was back when I was in my 20s in New York. I started playing in a poker game at a club called the Mayfair Club in New York, and some of the top players that got their start in the East Coast got their start in this game. Many players you've heard of: Dan Harrington, a former world champion; Jay Heimowitz, 6-time World Series of Poker bracelet winner; Steve Zolotow, 2-time bracelet winner in the World Series of Poker; and Eric Seidel, one of the greatest no-limit hold'em tournament players of all time, and owner of 5 World Series of Poker bracelets. We were all playing in the same game. We were playing almost every day. We would start at like 4 in the afternoon. We'd play till 2 in the morning, so of course we were playing a lot of hours. And then at like 2 in the morning, the game would break up, and the group of us would sort of retire to a bar somewhere nearby, and we would spend 2-3 hours talking about that day's play. And what happens when you have a group of enthusiastic friends that are playing and then sharing their ideas about the game is the group as a whole elevates the individuals in a way that they could not have elevated their own games if they were just playing and then thinking about the game on their own. Your friends are going to come up with ideas and theories and ways to play that you would have never thought of on your own, and you're going to have ideas that you'll contribute to the group that some other people may not have thought of. And this is a great way to really improve your game. So find some friends, use the tournament structures that I talked about in the first tape. Start playing poker tournaments or just start playing games amongst your friends. But then don't just like quit and go home and think about the game on your own. Find the few friends in your group that are really into the game and start sharing ideas amongst each other, and you're going to find your game improving very quickly. Well, we've covered a lot on this tape, and one thing I need to caution you about, and that is not to overdo it. Remember, the contents of the first tape are the fundamentals of the game, and those have to be the basic ways that you play your hands. You need to have good reasons to deviate from the fundamentals. It's very important that you incorporate the skills that I'm talking about on this tape into your game to become a feared and dangerous and successful player. But you have to remember, a good 80 to 90% of the time, I want you playing these hands pretty straight and pretty much by the book. And then you sprinkle in the plays that you're learning on this tape, and then that gives you the overall effect of skill and danger that will keep your opponents on their heels. Don't try and incorporate all these plays into your game at once. There's just too much, and I think your game will actually suffer if you try and do that. What I want you to do is I want you to concentrate on one of the skills that I talk about on this tape at a time. Try and master that skill, incorporate it into your game as you try and create your own unique style that works for you, and then once you have that skill mastered, you move on to the next skill. This is not a fast process, and you will need to take it slow. There's an ancient Chinese proverb that says, "The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step." Though this process may seem slow to you at times, one day you're going to look back and you're going to realize how far your game has come. Thank you for watching, and good luck. Okay, we're now going to look at one of my favorite tells, and it's the kind of tell that you really want to be watching for sort of out of the corner of your eye, and it's a very profitable tell when you do get to see it. So here we have a typical hand. Let's imagine that the game is full. There have been a lot of folds, and now we're coming around to Lori, and she folds her hand, and now it's up to Jim, and he's in cutoff position. He takes a look at his hand, and it's not very good, and he folds. And if you've been sitting in the big blind watching this action, and now it comes around to Mylene, and she's going to make it 600 here on the button, and you look down at sort of a mediocre hand, a hand like Jack 8 or really any 2 cards, and you probably throw your hand away. But if we pause this now and we go back to what Mylene was doing before the action came up to her, and if you were noticing this out of the corner of your eye, I think you'd have a very profitable situation here. So while Lori and Jim were folding their cards, Mylene took a look at the 9-7 offsuit, which isn't a very good hand, and did a very typical thing that people do when they look down at two cards that aren't very good and they assume they're not going to be in the pot. They get distracted. Cocktail waitress comes up and they start talking to the cocktail waitress, or they order a drink, or they talk to their neighbor here like Mylene is doing, or they just start looking off into space because they're not expecting to play the pot. And now as Jim is about to fold, you see, she looks over and she notices, oh, look at this. Everyone's folding to me. Maybe I can try and pick up the pot. And after he does fold, she looks down and she grabs her $600 and she makes her bet. Now, if you've been watching all of this, you realize there's almost no chance she has a good hand. If she had two aces, she's not going to be talking to Jared, her neighbor. She's going to be watching very intently all the action coming up to her. So you need to look for people who are distracted and then enter a pot because everyone's folded to them. And that's usually a sure sign that they have a weak hand. And if I were in the big blind and I'd seen all this, I don't care what I have, I'm going to re-raise and I'm going to pick up that money and I'm going to win about $1,000 with almost no risk. There's almost no chance that she has the kind of hand that can call me. Okay, let's look at another one of my favorite tells, and this will be a tell of strength as opposed to a tell of weakness. We have a three-way pot here, and the flop comes down a couple of sixes and a 7. Jim's in first position, and he checks, and Jared is next to act, and he checks, and now we've come up to Jai, and he's just sort of kind of staring at the pot. He doesn't know the actions to him. In fact, it takes the dealer to kind of jar him and let him know that it's to him. Sometimes it's the dealer, sometimes it's a player that says, hey, it's to you. This happens very often, and strangely and almost counterintuitively, it seems to happen a lot when someone has a very big hand. Now, it's not like he's been just looking off into space and he's not interested. He's kind of like looking at the pot, but he doesn't know it's to him. And then when he's told that it's to him, he immediately goes, oh, yes, and then he grabs some chips and he makes a sizable bet into the pot. I have never ever seen anyone bluff after this happens. Basically, you're almost embarrassed. You didn't know the action was to you, and it is very unlikely that somebody, after being informed that they didn't know the action was to them, would then have the wherewithal to try and bluff into the pot. Because you have to understand, when people are bluffing, they want things to be just right. They don't want to be able to look back and go, whoa, I was so stupid. Why did I bluff into that pot? And certainly, having the dealer or another player inform you that the action is to you, it gives someone an excuse not to bluff, even if they might have been thinking about bluffing. The fact that, and almost the embarrassment of the fact that they were told that the action is to them would stop them from bluffing. So when someone doesn't know the action is to them, and then they're informed of that, and then they make the bet, but just about 100 out of 100 times, they're actually going to have a very big hand. This is actually a sign of extreme strength when someone makes a bet like this. Okay, we're going to look at another strength tell here. We have Lori here in first position, and she checks, and she's playing heads up against Jared. And let's watch him put the chips in the pot here. You see his hands are just shaking. Again, this is almost counterintuitive. I think a lot of people would infer that if someone were putting the money in the pot and his hands were shaking, that he might be bluffing, that he's probably very nervous. But actually, this is usually a sign of extreme strength. There's just a lot of adrenaline pumping through his veins. He's very excited. It's actually a sign of excitement, and you get excited when you have a very big hand. It's very hard to control the adrenaline there. And he is betting. We've looked at this at a couple angles. You really need to be careful, particularly when an inexperienced player puts money in the pot and their hand is shaking. This is also the kind of tell that's very hard to control. So it would be a very hard tell to send out a false tell on, and it's a very hard tell to disguise if you have the problem of getting very excited when you flop a big hand. So this is definitely one of the reasons why, as a player, you need to become very comfortable in these types of situations. Because if your hands are shaking when you flop a big hand, that's going to be a sure sign of strength. Any of the experienced players at the table are going to know that, and they're going to avoid your big hands. Again, it's very important to be comfortable, and then they're not going to pick up one of the classic strength tells that there are in No Limit Hold'em.